Hi, my name is Stanislav Costiuc. I am a professional game designer with 11 years of experience in the industry, and today we continue ranking all Spider-Man games with the help of my Stasicritic scoring system, the details of which you can find in the pinned comment. Like before, the list is going to be live and constantly updated as we go through games in order of their release years, and here we're focusing only on games where Spider-Man is either the main protagonist or at least one of the main protagonists. The situation for Spider-Man video games has not been the greatest in the first years of their existence. Can the 90s change it? Let's find out. Spider-Man was a character so popular that of course it was only a matter of time until he hit the arcades. Sega released a cabinet in 1991 and it's stupid fun, which I suppose is really all that's required from a quarter-eaten machine. Besides Spider-Man, you can also play as Hawkeye, Submariner and Black Cat, though honestly only the latter makes sense to me as Spider-Man's teammate. But I guess the developers had to fill out a team of 4 somehow. Your choice of character really doesn't matter, each has pretty much exactly the same mechanics as Spider-Man, just with different animations. And overall, this might as well be just any other game with a Spider-Man skin on top of it, because the gameplay is that of your typical brawler. Heck, in this game Venom has been enhanced with the power of the Sorcerer's Stone. Maybe there's some things I didn't know about the comics, but there's stuff that's better not to think about, like the goons which feel like they serve the Batman's Joker, as well as these monkey man creatures something. What the game definitely has going for it is the variety of stuff thrown at you while regularly switching between brawling and platforming sections and getting into some honestly pretty epic set pieces. But the gameplay is as basic as it can get, with only hit and jump action and some combinations of the two. There is barely any depth to it, but that doesn't make playing it any less enjoyable, especially considering how amazing everything looks, like it is straight out of a comic book. If there are a couple of things that I would consider really problematic, is the fact that the characters walk pretty slow and the music for the most part was disappointing to me personally. It's not bad, but every track is so similar to each other that eventually the soundtrack transforms into a single ignorable background noise. But still, this game is really nice, that's why it gets a Stasicritic rating of 67. If you're in for some thoughtless button mashing enjoyment with pretty epic set pieces, the Spider-Man arcade game is a title for you. The title music of this game is absolutely amazing and gets you in the mood for some incredibly epic action-packed experience. It's not. What is truly saddening is that you can see how this team-up between Spider-Man and the X-Men by Software Creations could have gone quite nicely. The controls are very responsive, which I believe is worth mentioning, as in plenty of Spider-Man games we've discussed before, they're not. Every character you play as has a unique twist to them. For example, Wolverine has regenerative health, Gambit throws cards, and Spider-Man naturally uses his web abilities. It is worth mentioning how in this game Spider-Man can only swing off solid objects above him, and I personally find it curious that even back then there were attempts to find solutions on how to make Spider-Man's webs attached to something other than air. Now, that inspired labyrinthine level design aside, the real issue with the game is how it lacks a lot of mechanical details to make it properly enjoyable to play. If we take Spider-Man, since this video is more about him anyway, he can shoot webs in air, but he can't initiate swinging from air. He needs to stand on the ground to do that. He can't turn corners while climbing, he can't even get up on the ledge from the side of the wall he's climbing on, he has to jump to the other side first. There is a lot of annoyances like that for every character. Spider-Man and X-Men gets a Stasicritic rating of 38 as a game that has potential, but sadly doesn't reach it. However, even though I wouldn't recommend playing this, the music from the game is something worth listening to regardless. It truly is fantastic. This title by Beat Studios has issues similar to those that plague other Spider-Man titles, mainly a lot of clunkiness. And yet, maybe not perfect but definitely smarter level design allows to alleviate a lot of those problems. Sure, the enemy hit detection is horrible, but you can avoid a lot of them anyway with smart acrobatics, and you can't just skip levels by web swinging like in the Game Boy Spider-Man game we have discussed in the last video, because in this game you need to be able to attach your webs to surfaces. Return of the Sinister 6 for NES can be a bit difficult sometimes, but it is definitely easier to enjoy than most Spider-Man games we have talked about before. As such, it gets a Metacritic rating of 43. If you're a big Spider-Man fan, this is a game that you might actually enjoy despite its problems. So, the eagle-eyed of you might have noticed that in the last entry I have mentioned the NES version specifically, even though Return of the Sinister 6 was also released on Master System and Game Gear. Don't be fooled by the fact that this version looks like the same game that's nicer thanks to a richer color palette, although that doesn't really help the visuals much as character proportions and animations are still weird. I have the Master System and Game Gear version as a separate entry because it actually plays far worse as it misses a lot of mechanics from the NES version. Not only are controls less responsive, but you can't chain web swings, you can't just climb up a building but have to do a weird jump motion at the top, and most importantly, there is no jump kick move, which in NES is pretty imperative, especially for bosses like Electro. The Game Gear version has it even worse, as it is exactly like the Master System version, but with a far smaller viewport and visibility. The NES version was clunky but still playable, and this is a more problematic variant of that, so it gets a disappointing 30. The shine of better colors is not worth the increased amount of frustration, even though the Master System version has more continuous, but you also have to use them more often. This is another Spider-Man game by Beat Studios, and honestly it is noticeable, there's quite a lot of gameplay similarities between this title and Return of the Sinister 6, though sadly faults as well, and they are much harder to avoid in this Game Boy title, as this time they are more closely related to core Spider-Man abilities. For example, Spider-Man sticks to walls only after a double jump but not a single jump, jump kick can be activated only after a normal jump and it works only on the downward arc, and so on. Things like this can increase the frustration during gameplay, which is a shame as The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has the best level design direction out of every Spider-Man game we have discussed up to this point. There's quite a lot of clever things, like having to attach your webs to Hobgoblin's glider, using spider sense to find the real Mysterio, avoiding target reticles on screen to not get shot, and that's if you don't mention the explorative and somewhat non-linear nature of the experience, as your progression depends on items that you can find in different order across the interconnected areas. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 gets a Metacritic rating of 51. It's actually a very short game, but the very clunky controls surely are a factor in walkthroughs taking far longer than they should. If you can stomach and get used to these controls, you'll have a fine time. Otherwise, the experience might be questionable, though conceptually, I really like what this game is going for. Most lists put the Game Boy port of Arcade's Revenge into the same entry as the console versions. They can understand why it tries to be the same game. And honestly, if the Game Boy version would have been a port with the only significant difference being worse graphics due to technical limitations, I wouldn't have singled it out either. But here's the thing, it doesn't play the same, because not only is the mechanical implementation slightly different, but so are the proportions between the main character and level environments, which is the massive difference that warrants a separate entry. It is barely possible to play the Game Boy version. Technically, it's not a broken game, but it sure feels like it is, which is why it gets a Metacritic rating of 23, saved from a lower score only by some of the positive conceptual elements from the original console versions. The Sega Genesis version of Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin has received an updated re-release for Sega CD, which means that almost nobody out of Genesis owners actually have experienced it. And it's a shame because it is surprisingly so much more enjoyable. If we take the core gameplay, there's so many improvements: faster crawling speed, sticking to walls connected to a button press and not hold, more comfortable wall climbing of background buildings, new combat moves like swing kicks, being actually able to go around corners while climbing, and plenty others. Some things have also been streamlined. For example, you no longer have to return to the apartment to restore health or mess with the photo mechanics to be able to purchase web fluid for your shooters. Health and web tokens are just lines spread around the levels. It does make the experience a bit less Spider-Man-y, I guess, but since these mechanics weren't that polished anyway, their exclusion leads to a more streamlined, enjoyable experience. Is the game perfect? No, it is still pretty clunky, and your best bet is to resort to cheese tactics in combat, like let's say abusing the hell out of swing kicks against bosses. But still, the gameplay can actually be engaging now. All levels have been absolutely redesigned, and they might not have become great or anything, but they do make much more sense. The most curious thing is the updated structure that's closer to an open world game. You can choose between multiple locations, and far from all feature a villain to fight at the end. Some can hold things like comic book covers for you to collect. There are two aspects that show just how much love for the character the developers at Grey Matter, which were responsible for the re-release, had. The first is the updated soundtrack, mainly the oh-so cringy but also so catchy rock song written specifically for this game. And the second, the new cutscenes.
Officer, that nice young man in the long underwear saved my purse and all my money.
Good work, Spider-Man. It's a good thing you came along when you did. You're the best friend this city ever had. I'm just glad you're on our side.
I was just doing my job, officer. Happy to be of help.
Young man, I don't know what I would have done without you, but you really shouldn't run around in public dressed like that.
Yes, ma'am. I'll keep it in mind.
Goodbye, Spider-Man.
Are they great? I mean, the sound quality is horrible, the animation is oftentimes weird, like here Peter clearly doesn't kiss Mary Jane in the mouth, but rather her left nostril. The acting is cheesy as hell. But I'll be damned if I didn't enjoy a single second of it. It's amazing.
Well, Electro, it looks like your circuit has come up a little short. And I thought you were such a live wire.
Laugh while you can, Bug Brain. The Kingpin has you right where he wants you this time.
Well now, what's this?
How should I know? I've never seen it before.
Right. Well, I'll just hang on to it if you don't mind. I'm sure it'll come in handy. You just relax, Sparky, and don't blow a fuse. There'll be someone along to cut you loose any time now.
Why don't you relax, Spider-Man? Take some time off. Get away from it all. I know the perfect place. Coney Island.
Sounds like a plan. Can I bring you back a hot dog?
I'd say yes, but you won't be coming back.
Is that any way to talk to your old pal?
I'm fine ignoring half of the game's open world locations because, honestly, while the gameplay is improved, it's still too clunky for me to participate in deep exploration, but going through the main campaign just to see the next cutscene? Count me in. The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin gets a Metacritic score of 61. This version has been a very pleasant surprise. While not perfect, the overall atmosphere created by the updated story cutscenes and soundtrack, alongside the mechanical improvements, transforms the game into a lump of oh so tasty cheese. Definitely one of the better Spider-Man games of those times. After the big improvement that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for Game Boy was over the predecessor, I couldn't wait to see what the next iteration from Beat Studios would bring. To call my feelings a disappointment is an understatement. Let's just say that I had to force myself to not rage quit on the first level. Then I had to force myself to not rage quit on the second level. On the third level, I rage quit. Visually speaking, the game definitely looks good. Not only are the background and character sprites very detailed, but the animations are very smooth, Spidey's especially. How the smooth animation has been implemented, however, is at the core of all issues. Even such a simple action as jumping feels incredibly delayed because you first have to wait for Spider-Man going through the whole knee-bending animation. And the level design is once again very disappointing, filled not only with arbitrary goals but also time limits. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 gets a Metacritic rating of 24. It is sadly a considerable drop in quality in comparison to The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yet another handheld port of Arcade's Revenge that attempts to recreate the same mechanics and levels, but feels quite different from the original, hence a separate entry. The big difference from the original version are the very floaty controls and a bit skewed level proportions. Although the game is not nearly as rage-inducing as the Game Boy version, it still feels pretty frustrating to play, so gets a Metacritic score of 30. Early 90s have brought much nicer experiences to the Spider-Man video game universe. There's still plenty of disappointments, but now it doesn't feel like there has been nothing to play, although for the best experiences you would either need to go to the arcades or own a Sega CD, both pretty specific conditions. In the next video we'll find out if the upwards trend continues.